He didn't look up when she approached the table. That was the first thing Celine Marsh noticed about Callum Voss. Not the two armed men flanking him like stone pillars. Not the way every other server in the restaurant had suddenly found reasons to be anywhere else. Not even the quiet that had settled over the dining floor the moment he walked in. What she noticed was that he didn't look up. He was reading something. A single sheet of paper, folded once, held between two fingers like it weighed nothing and everything at the same time. The candlelight caught the sharp angle of his jaw. The grey at his temples was the only thing about him that suggested he'd ever had a difficult day. Celine had worked the books at Aurelio's for 3 years. She knew what the restaurant was. She knew who owned it, who ate here, who settled debts in the private room upstairs that no one talked about. She was the accountant. She sat in a back office with bad fluorescent lighting and kept numbers that would have made a federal prosecutor weep with joy. And she kept them clean, and she kept her mouth shut, and she stayed invisible. That was the arrangement. Tonight, however, Marcus, the actual floor manager, had called in sick, which meant Juliet, the head server, was running the floor, which meant when table 9 came in at 9:10 with no reservation, and every guard at the door snapping to attention, there was no one to send but Celine, who happened to be walking through the dining room at exactly the wrong moment with a clipboard and a cardigan that had a pen stain on the left cuff. "Table 9, Juliet said, grabbing her arm without looking at her. "Go. I'm not front of house," Celine said. "Tonight you are. Go." So she went. She was aware of how she looked. She was always aware of how she looked, in the specific, low-grade, never quite dormant way that women like her were trained by the world to be. She was not small. She had not been small since she was 12 years old. She had learned, somewhere around 26, to stop apologizing for it. But learning something and feeling it are two entirely different things, and walking across a room toward Callum Voss, while every eye in the restaurant tracked her movement, was not, precisely, the moment she felt her most confident. She stopped at the edge of the table. "Good evening," she said. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" He turned the page over, set it down, looked up. His eyes were the color of deep water, not blue, not gray, something in between that shifted depending on where the light hit. They moved over her face with the unhurried precision of a man who had learned to read people the way other men read contracts. Methodically, without sentiment, looking for the clause that would be used against him later. "You're not a server," he said. His voice was low. Not quiet, there was a difference. Quiet implied effort. Like he'd never needed to raise it in his life, because the rooms he occupied always went still for him. "No," Celine said. "I'm filling in. For whom?" "The floor manager." "And you are?" She held his gaze. "The person taking your drink order." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, exactly. More like the ghost of a reaction he'd decided against. One of the men flanking him, broad, bald, with a scar that crossed his left eyebrow, shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. A warning. She didn't look at him. "Whiskey," Callum said. "Neat. The good one." "We have 4 that qualify," she said. "Any preference, or would you like a recommendation?" He leaned back in his chair, studied her. "Surprise me. I'll be back in a moment." She turned and walked to the bar, and she did not look back, and she did not let herself feel the weight of his gaze between her shoulder blades, even though she felt it the entire way. She brought him the Blantons. It was not the most expensive bottle behind the bar, but it was the right whiskey for a man who wore a watch that cost more than her car, but hadn't bothered to button the top collar of his shirt. She'd picked that up in 3 seconds. The men who needed to prove something always ordered the most expensive thing. The men who already knew what they were never did. He looked at the glass when she set it down. Then he looked at her. "Blantons," he said. "Yes, not the Pappy." "No, why not?" She kept her expression neutral. "The Pappy is for men who want people to notice what they're drinking. You don't strike me as someone who needs that." The silence that followed was very long and very specific. The bodyguard with the scarred eyebrow made a sound in his throat. The other one, younger, with a jaw like a fist, went very still. Callum Voss picked up the glass, took a slow sip, set it down. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working," she said. "I know. Sit down anyway. Mr. Voss, how do you know my name?" She paused. "I work here. That's not an answer." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." He watched her. She watched him back. It was not comfortable, exactly. Nothing about this man suggested comfort was something he traded in. But it was not as frightening as it should have been, and she wasn't entirely sure what to do with that. "Sit down," he said again, and this time it wasn't a request. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at a spreadsheet he hadn't been expecting, with focused, slightly irritated attention, like he was recalibrating something. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He turned the glass in his fingers. "Everyone in this building is afraid of me. Except you." "Everyone in this building knows their job description," she said. "Mine tonight is taking your drink order. Being frightened isn't part of it. And your actual job description." She held his gaze. Numbers. Something shifted in his expression, very slightly, like a door opening an inch and then closing again. "Numbers," he repeated. "Yes. What kind?" "The kind that stay where I put them." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what I find interesting about that answer? I can't imagine." "It's exactly the right answer," he said, "for someone who knows exactly who I am and exactly what this restaurant is. And it tells me nothing." "That was the point," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his eyes had changed. The flatness had given way to something else, something that looked unsettlingly like interest. "What's your name?" he said. "Celine. Celine." He said it like he was filing it somewhere. "You can go, Celine." She stood, straightened her cardigan, picked up her clipboard. "I'll send someone for your food order," she said. "No," he said. "You'll come back yourself." She didn't answer that. She walked back to the bar, and Juliet grabbed her arm again, and this time her voice was a register higher than usual. "What did he say to you?" "He ordered whiskey," Celine said. "That's all?" "That's all. It was not all. He came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. By the third week, the staff had quietly, collectively, decided that Table 9 was Celine's table. A decision that no one announced and no one argued with, the way all decisions in places like Aurelio's were made, by the silent acknowledgement of something that had already become true. He didn't always talk to her. Sometimes he ate, read his paper, and left. Sometimes he asked her questions. Small ones, sideways ones, the kind that didn't seem like much until she was lying awake at 2 a.m, turning them over in her head. What did she think about the market right now? Whether she'd ever worked anywhere but here, what she'd studied in school. She answered carefully. She was always careful. She had learned in 3 years of keeping Aurelio's books that the spaces between words were where the dangerous things lived. But she watched him too. She watched the way he handled his men, not with the theatrical cruelty she'd half expected, but with a cold, precise authority that left no room for misinterpretation. She watched the way he read the room constantly, the way his eyes moved to the door every time it opened. She watched the way he went very still, once when a man walked in that he recognized. Not afraid, nothing so readable as that, but alert in the way that a predator goes alert, all that stillness suddenly full of something coiled and ready. The man left without incident. Celine told herself she wasn't curious about him. She told herself she was simply observant. It was her job to be observant. You could not keep books like the ones she kept without being very, very good at noticing things that were trying not to be noticed. She told herself a lot of things. The night it went wrong was a Friday in November. She heard it before she saw it, a voice she didn't recognize, too loud for the room, with the particular recklessness of someone who had either drunk too much or was very deliberately not caring about consequences. She was coming out of the back office when she heard it, and she slowed her steps and stayed near the wall and looked. A man had stopped beside Table 9. He was thick-necked, red-faced, wearing a suit that was expensive and a loosened tie that wasn't. He was not one of the regulars. He had the look of someone who'd walked in from a different world and hadn't yet realized he was in the wrong one. "Voss," the man said. He didn't sit down. He stood at the edge of the table like he was doing Callum a favor by acknowledging him. "Didn't expect to see you here." Callum set down his fork. He didn't look up immediately. When he did, his expression had not changed in any visible way, but the 2 men on either side of him had both shifted their hands. "Raymond," he said. "Just that. Heard you've been having some trouble with the Eastport accounts." Raymond said, too loudly, too cheerfully, with the grin of a man who'd decided he was untouchable. "Messy business. Sit down, Raymond. I'm good here." Raymond's grin widened. He was drunk, Celine decided, not incapacitated, drunk enough to be reckless, sober enough to mean it. "Just thought I'd let you know. People are talking, saying Voss is losing his grip. Old news, maybe." The restaurant had gone quiet in that specific way. Restaurants went quiet when something terrible was about to happen. Callum picked up his whiskey glass, took a slow sip, set it down. His eyes never left Raymond's face. "You drove here," he said. Raymond blinked. "What, tonight?" "Yeah, so?" Give me your keys. Raymond's grin faltered. Excuse me, your car keys, give them to me. The voice was entirely, disturbingly calm. You've been drinking since 6. I can smell it from here. You're not driving yourself home. Raymond stared at him. The restaurant stared at Raymond. Are you serious right now? I'll have someone take you, Callum said. You can get the car tomorrow. This isn't a discussion. The silence stretched. Raymond's jaw worked. Then, with the specific deflation of a man who had expected violence and received something he couldn't argue with, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his keys, and dropped them on the table. He left without another word. Callum looked down at the keys for a moment. Then he picked up his fork and resumed eating. Celine realized she had been holding her breath. She released it. She went back to the office. She sat down. She did not think about what she had just watched. She thought about it for the rest of the night. The following Thursday, she brought him his whiskey without being asked. He looked at the glass, looked at her. I didn't order yet, he said. I know, she said. You always order it. I thought I'd save the step. He was quiet for a moment. What if I wanted something different tonight? Do you? He looked at her for a long moment. No. She set the glass down. She was turning to leave when he said quietly, Sit. Not a question. Not quite a command. Something in between. She sat. He looked at her with that same quality of focused, recalibrating attention he'd given her the first night. Like she was a problem he hadn't expected and hadn't yet decided how to solve. You watched what happened with Raymond, he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't pretend it was. Yes, and nothing, she said. It's not my business. You have an opinion. I always have an opinion, she said. That's different from it being my business. He turned his glass in his fingers. Tell me anyway. She looked at him steadily. I think you handled it in the way that would leave him the most embarrassed without giving him anything to retaliate against. You took away his scene before he could make one. He came here to humiliate you in front of people, and you turned it into a safety concern, which made him look stupid, and you look reasonable, and now he can't complain about it without sounding like a child. The silence that followed was different from the silences that usually followed things she said. Usually there was a pause, the pause of someone deciding how to react, how much to give away. This pause had no deciding in it. He was simply looking at her. That's exactly right, he said. I know, she said. Something shifted in his face. Not the ghost of a reaction this time. An actual one, small, controlled, but real. You've been watching me, he said. You come in every Thursday, she said. I'd have to actively avoid it. Most people avoid it on purpose. I'm not most people. He looked at her. That slow, measured look that she had learned over the past weeks was the way he looked at the things he was deciding to trust. It was not a comfortable look to be on the receiving end of. It was not meant to be. No, he said. You're not. She did not know then what she was walking into. She found out on a Tuesday, not a Thursday, which should have been the first warning, when she came into the office to find the books had been touched, not altered, not yet, but touched. She could tell the way you could always tell when someone had been in your space. A file slightly off-center, a folder closed in the wrong direction, the specific absence of the pen she always left at a particular angle on top of the ledger. Someone had been in the books. She sat very still for a moment. Then she got up, went to the safe behind the false panel behind the second filing cabinet, and pulled out the backup ledger. The real one. The one that nobody knew existed because she had started it herself. Quietly, 3 years ago, because she was very good at numbers and very good at noticing things, and she had understood, very early, that in places like this, having something no one knew you had was the only insurance worth keeping. She took it home that night. She did not tell anyone. 3 days later, one of Callum's men came to the office. Not the scarred one, a new one, slim, careful, with the particular stillness of someone who carried messages and was paid well not to read them. Mr. Voss would like to see you, he said. About what, she said. He didn't say. She closed her laptop. Tell him I'll come Thursday. Same as always. The man looked at her. He meant tonight. She looked back at him. Thursday, she said. Same as always. The man left. She thought with some clarity that she might have just made a significant mistake. He came himself on Thursday. He sat down. She brought his whiskey without being asked. She sat across from him without being told. He looked at her with those deep water eyes and said, You found it. She didn't ask what. Yes, and you didn't tell anyone? No. Why not? She held his gaze. Because I didn't know yet who I could trust. Something moved in his jaw, not anger. Consideration. And now, he said. Now I have the backup ledger, she said. which means I have every transaction for the last 3 years, cross-referenced against the official books, with every discrepancy flagged and dated, which means I can tell you exactly who has been skimming from you, how much, and since when. The silence was absolute. His hands were very still on the table. That document, he said carefully, is not something you should have. No, she agreed. It's not, but I do, and I kept it safe, and I'm telling you about it. She looked at him steadily. That should tell you something. He studied her for a very long moment. The candle between them guttered once and steadied. It tells me, he said slowly, that you are either the most reckless person I've ever met in my life, or, she said, or the most deliberate. She didn't answer. He leaned forward, just slightly. Which is it? Deliberate, she said, always deliberate. He sat back. He looked at her with something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that was not the cold, flat attention of a man assessing a liability, but something rawer and less controlled, like whatever he kept behind that particular wall had shifted an inch without his permission. The name, he said. Who is it? She told him. What happened next, she was not there for. She was very deliberately not there for it. What she did know, because she was good at numbers and good at noticing, was that by Monday the discrepancies had stopped. The accounts were clean in a way they hadn't been in 14 months. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. On Thursday he came in. He sat at table 9. She brought the whiskey. She sat across from him. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Outside, November had become December, and the restaurant was dressed for it. Small lights, dark pine, the smell of something warm. You could have used that, he said. The ledger, against me. Yes, she said, but you didn't. No, why? She turned her own glass in her fingers. Because I'm very good at math, she said. And the calculation didn't add up. He watched her. Meaning I've been watching you for 3 months, she said. And I think you are not a good man. I think you have done things I wouldn't want to know the details of. I think the world you operate in runs on violence and fear, and I am not naive about what that means. She met his eyes. But I also think you are a man who sent a drunk stranger home safely because it was the right thing to do, and it cost you nothing to do it. I think you are a man who inspires loyalty that isn't built on terror, which is rarer than you think. I think you protect the people in your circle with a ferocity that most people never see because you don't need them to. She paused. And I think the only person I would have given that ledger to was you. The silence stretched. The candle between them was very still. Celine, he said. Yes, you have, he said very quietly. Absolutely no sense of self-preservation. On the contrary, she said, I have excellent self-preservation instincts. That's why I'm sitting here. He looked at her, she looked back, and for the first time since she had known him, Callum Voss smiled. Not the ghost of one. Not the controlled almost version she'd catalogued over 3 months of Thursday nights, but a real one, sudden and unguarded, that changed his entire face in the half-second before he could stop it. He reached across the table. His hand covered hers, large, warm, still carrying the faint tension of a man who was always in control. And he held it there, and he didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Outside, December settled over the city. Inside, at a table by the window of a restaurant that kept its ledgers in 2 places now. One that showed the world what it wanted to see, and one that held the truth. The most dangerous man in the city held the hand of the woman who had looked at everything he was and decided, very deliberately, that he was worth the risk. And if his grip was slightly tighter than it needed to be, and if it stayed that way for a long time, and if neither of them moved to leave even when the restaurant emptied and the lights dimmed and the staff quietly, wordlessly, gave them the room, well, the numbers, for once, were simple.